This week we are talking about how to help pitchers develop better pitches. So this week is all about pitch design. No better person to bring on to speak on this subject other than Jared Gaynor, who is the founder of Pitching Coach U. Jared is a former pitching coach in the Minnesota Twins organization and brings an extensive knowledge and background to pitching development. He is the founder of Pitching Coach U, so you can follow him on Twitter at Pitching Coach U. Puts out some incredible content for pitching coaches and pitchers. He also just has a new course that just dropped. You can check the description below if you're interested in that. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Jared Gaynor. All right, Jared, back again on the podcast. I believe this is your, seventh or eighth? Is this your seventh time on the podcast?
I lost count after the third or fourth one, but I know this is the first one since, what was it, October that we did it the last time?
It was October, and I didn't even realize how long ago it was that you came on until I just was going through past episodes and saw it's been over 6 months since you've been on. So welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on as the most reoccurring guest. And you're someone I always go to for anything that's pitching related. Like I feel like at this point, I really, first of all, obviously we're very close friends, but I really always enjoy following you because you make pitching seem just very simple and easy to understand. And actually, I remember when we had Dave Lawn on the podcast, who's pitching coach at TCU now. He had when we were texting back and forth, that was one of the things that he had said that he really liked that you did too, is just making it's simple, it's applicable, and I think at times. That's what I try to do at times for hitting, not at times, but all the time. But I think that's something that I think you do the best at, that I see from the pitching side, is just taking something that's very complex as pitching and developing pitchers with all the technology out there and making it simple for guys not that smart like me who can understand it.
Well, I'm definitely not the smart one myself, but I tend to try to do the hard thinking and I guess more of the work on the front end where it's more complex, where I'm learning and teaching myself so that I can keep it simple when I'm teaching it to a player or even helping other coaches with information. Because at the end of the day, we want kids to be able to understand what we want them to do and to be able to execute it. And if that means saying things as if I'm talking to a second grader versus making it a doctorate level type of conversation, like I'm going to go with as easy as possible, because it doesn't matter how smart I sound or the words I use if the player can't apply what I'm trying to get them to do. So if I can do the hard work on the front end of learning and trying to figure out maybe something that is complex and boil it down to something simple to where I can actually make it actionable and teachable for the kid or the coach that I'm instructing, like in my opinion, that's the way to go. Like the verbiage you use, it doesn't matter how smart you sound if the player doesn't get better. At the end of the day, it comes down to getting players better.
Love that. I love that. And I also think that the majority of coaches who are out there listening, like I just don't think most people resonate with a lot of that big word lingo. And I think as humans, we want to overcomplicate everything. And I think at times it may seem cool, but cool doesn't scale, I don't think. And so I think being practical scales a lot better. And so that's why I've always enjoyed following you on the pitching side and enjoy listening to your podcast and things like that too. And one of the things, this is where I wanted to start out. One of the tweets that caught my attention is you talking about curveballs for kids, because this is something that, you'll hear a lot about from different coaches at all levels, and I hear it even from parents, and I'm just working with hitters, but I'll hear parents talking about that too, of curveballs, and should you start kids early on curveballs? Is it bad for their arms? You see the Tommy John epidemic right now, and is that because kids are throwing curveballs at such a young age? So maybe my first question to you is, at what age should kids start learning to throw a curveball? And is it bad on their arms the earlier that they start?
Know if there's a magic answer for the age, but I would say, like, if you're 10 or 11, you simply don't need it. Like, you probably haven't mastered the fastball. Like, let's start with the basics. It's just like anything else. You need to build a foundation before you build layers on it. And to me, a curveball or any off-speed pitch really, it isn't a part of that first step in developing yourself as a player. So I would focus on the fastball at the youth age, like whether it's a four seam or a two seam. I would probably focus on the four seam to start. just because I see so many kids that can't spin the fastball well. And sometimes it carries over into, as they get older, it carries over because they never really put the attention and focus on it. And what I mean by spinning it well, I'm not talking about spin rate, but more of the spin direction of the ball. You'll see a lot of kids that are under 13 years old, they'll cut the ball when they throw it. So, for those of you that are watching, I'm holding a baseball right now with dots on it. I don't have a regular baseball with me. But when they throw a baseball, instead of getting through it and behind it and creating good backspin on the ball, they'll actually be on the side of it a little bit, almost like a football. So if you've ever played catch with like a 10-year-old, you'll notice that the ball usually is spinning a little wonky and it's almost spinning like a bullet at you. And whenever I work with a younger kid, which I normally don't work with youth age, but when I do, I try to really focus on just clean fastball spin and trying to get them to just backspin it as cleanly as they can to me. As far as the breaking balls, I mean, I would say around 13, 14 is probably a fine time, but it's different for everybody. Like if someone is super underdeveloped at 13 years old and they can't throw the fastball well, they're throwing 60 miles an hour, like I think a curveball to me is still skipping steps, right? Like we want to have a good fastball because as you go up levels, you look at Major League Baseball, for example, the highest level, those guys are able to command their fastball so well, and it allows them to be more effective with their off-speed pitches. But if they're not throwing their fastball for a strike or they don't have good feel for it, it's not going to make their secondary pitches as effective. So I would start there and try not to worry about what your teammates are doing. If you're 11, you're 12, you're 13, or seeing what other parents are saying or coaches, because there's going to be kids that are 10, 11, 12 that are throwing sliders, curveballs, changeups, and they're dominating. They're just crushing people because kids just aren't used to seeing pitches at that age or just haven't been able to adjust to hitting off speed pitches well. So it's more of playing the long game. Yes, you might sacrifice a little bit early on by throwing just fastballs or primarily fastballs, but because you're focusing on that and setting the foundation, when you do get to teenage years and you get into high school, you are already going to have a really solid foundation with that fastball that's going to allow you to maybe move a little bit quicker with that secondary pitches as opposed to a younger player who's trying to play catch up with maybe his fastball. So I don't know if there's a specific age, and related to injuries, there could be a little bit of a connection with it, but more than anything, my approach is just not trying to get ahead of yourself from a development standpoint on what the priority should be at certain ages.
You'd mentioned if you're throwing 60 miles an hour, you don't need to be worried about throwing a curveball. Is there a certain velocity where it's like, okay, now you've checked that box, like now you can start implementing a curveball? Like maybe that's an easier way to answer it is it's based on how hard they throw the fastball.
Yeah, I would still say, honestly, I mean, I threw breaking balls as a kid, and it's probably because I had two older brothers that were 5 and 7 years older than me. So they were in high school when I was in, little league and those ages. So I was seeing what they were doing. I wanted to throw them. So I was throwing breaking balls at 10 years old and all of that. But so from a velocity standpoint, though, like if I could do it over again, and even like with my boys as they get into baseball, I'm probably going to hold off until they're around 13, 14 before really worrying about those pitches. It regardless of what their velocity is. Now, assuming they're
Mhm.
decent, they're freshmen in high school. Like I think once you get to high school, you kind of have to have at least one off speed pitch. And that's what I would do is focus on one at a time. So many kids have four pitches or five pitches, or they think they do, and they all move kind of the same. But really just dominating one off speed pitch, master that. So you have two pitches of fastball and either a changeup or a breaking ball, master that. And then maybe by the end of high school, you can really start to focus on that third pitch. I'm not saying that you can't have a third pitch before that, but like really want to make sure that you have at least one above average secondary pitch before worrying about a third and a fourth pitch. But as far as velocity, I would say if you get above 70 miles an hour, you're 70, 75, probably good to start worrying about an off speed pitch. If you're a freshman throwing 60, 65, I mean, you really need velocity, which I'm guessing if you're throwing 60, 65 as a freshman, you're probably just undersized. You need to get bigger and stronger, which was the case for me. As a freshman, I was like 5'6", 110 pounds. So like I just needed to get bigger. I needed time to go on for me just to get physically more mature and to get stronger and focus on those things. So I'm not saying you should do a velocity program necessarily at 14 years old, but more so your velocity plan is maturing, getting stronger, starting to build the foundation in the weight room. But high school, like, yeah, if you're pitching competitively at that age and you're pitching for your high school team, like you're going to need a secondary pitch. So I would say probably around eighth, ninth grade would be an appropriate time to start adding a secondary pitch.
And then the actual tweet, as I had mentioned before, which I kind of get off topic there because I just had another question come to me, and that's why I asked you about the actual age to start having kids throw the breaking ball. But the actual tweet that you had put out that caught my attention was you said, in my opinion, most pitchers should learn a slider before a curveball, higher velo, easier to command, less wrist or hand manipulation. There are always exceptions, but I see too many high school pitchers with slow, loopy curveballs and not enough hard, short sliders. So should these kids, when they do start learning a breaking ball at 14 years old, should it not be actually a curveball? It should be a slider.
I think so. And the main reason is whichever point it was, second or third point, where I talked about wrist manipulation, as well as the command of the pitch. Because throwing like a gyro slider, so for those that aren't familiar with what gyro means, or a bullet slider, I should say, simply just that. The ball is spinning like a bullet. And this dot makes it really easy for you to see. If I'm throwing a fastball like this, a bullet slider would simply be that dot is starting to turn towards you and it's spinning like this, just like a bullet would be out of a gun, or like a football. Football is another good analogy of how that's spinning. So that is a really good starting point for me because those are going to be higher velocity pitches, as well as it doesn't take a lot of this. Like I don't need to torque my wrist and really get around this pitch. It's usually just as simple as an off-centered fastball grip. And that allows me just to rip a little bit more through the outside part of the baseball while still being behind the ball. But now I'm creating a little bit of bullet spin, and that pitch is going to have a little bit more depth and potentially a little bit more glove side movement compared to my fastball. So the fact that it's less manipulation should make the learning curve a little bit easier. And also with being higher velo, there is a pretty strong correlation between breaking ball velocity and swing and miss. So if I can kill two birds with one stone, that's great. And then because it's less manipulation, I should have better feel for commanding it and throw it for strikes, because really big curveballs are really tough to command. Like if you look at all levels, and I can use the major leagues as an example, curveballs get swung at the least out of every single pitch. The swing percentage is about 41, 42%. So 4 out of 10 curveballs that you throw are actually going to get swings. Every other pitch is closer to 50%. It's like high 40s pushing 50%. So with that alone, if they're not going to swing the bat, then you have to be able to throw it for a strike, or at least show that you can throw it for a strike before you will start to get chases on it. So it just makes it really tough when we start getting big wrist manipulation or getting our fingers in front of the baseball, big shapes, and trying to land it for a strike, knowing that they're not going to swing very often. I just think that a short slider is just really one of the easier things to do first, and it's a very successful pitch for a lot of guys.
Well, I say what, anytime someone asks me, I'm now going to go and say you need to be throwing a slider, not a curveball at a young age. Because I think actually what you just said right there, and we'll make sure to put that out a good amount on social media, is because I think the majority of people out there, they're still teaching curveballs when they do start implementing an off-speed pitch. So I like that you're thinking about it from like more of a holistic lens, and you're thinking more long term, where it's like, okay, what does the data show? What is going to be the most impactful pitch for this pitcher to throw long term? And I think the slider, it makes sense in that you have the data to back it up, and how you think you said only what's the curveball, 4 out of 10 pitches, 4 out of 10 breaking balls get swings and misses at the major league level.
Not even a miss, just a swing period.
Oh, just a swing period.
Yeah. So they're taking curveballs 60% of the time. They're not even going to swing 60% of the time.
Interesting. Interesting.
So if you are going to throw it, you need to make sure you can throw it in zone at a very high rate.
Okay. All right. What about, I want to talk a little bit about movement plots. So this is something I wanted you to come on the podcast, because talk about more so specific pitch movements. I think a lot of people have seen movement plots, but for those who haven't seen a movement plot, or even really know what that means from a pitching standpoint, could you walk everybody through what that is?
Okay. So when we talk about movement plots and profiles, there's essentially 3 types that there are. So there's guys that have pitches that move more north to south. So when I mean north to south, think 4-seam fastballs, to where it's just true backspin, not a lot of horizontal or side to side type of movement. Generally speaking, these guys will have curveballs, more like 12 to 6 curveballs, or minimal horizontal movement. They might have a changeup that fades and goes down, and maybe they throw a bullet slider. So if you're looking at like movement of these pitches, it's pretty much up and down. East to west guys, it's exactly what it sounds like. Their pitches are moving more right and left. So they're throwing more sinkers, they're throwing more sweepy sliders, maybe throwing changeups that have a little bit of depth and fade. Their pitches are just generally moving right to left. And then combo guys, or hybrid pitchers, are a mix of both of these. Typically, these guys have a lot of pitches. They have like 5 pitches in some cases at the major league level. And these guys essentially have 2 different approaches. They have more of a north-south approach, depending on who they're facing. And other guys, they'll face with more of an east-west approach. So maybe against, if it's a right-handed pitcher and they're facing a lefty, maybe they go 4 seams, curveballs, and changeups to lefties. And against righties, they throw their sinker and their sweepy slider primarily. So they're changing their profile depending on who they are facing. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of this. These are two north-south examples. One on the left is Tyler Glasnow, right-handed pitcher. One on the right is Carlos Rodon, who is a left-handed pitcher. So before I dive into explaining the north-south again here, I just want to show those that aren't familiar with what a movement plot is, once again, what we are looking at. We are essentially looking at how much vertical break the pitch has in inches, as well as horizontal. So when we look at this dash that's going straight across horizontal, that is showing us how much horizontal movement there is. The vertical line is showing us how much vertical movement there is. And something to note, this is induced vertical break. So that's why you're seeing positive numbers for some of these pitches. With gravity, no pitch actually rises. So if we were actually seeing this with gravity, they would all have a negative number because gravity is forcing every pitch to move down. What this is showing us is it is showing us the difference between the location of the pitch. So let me just use an example of a four-seam fastball thrown at the top of the zone. So let's just say that is thrown here. It is measuring the difference between that and where the ball would have gone straight out of the hand with the exact same release angle and velocity, but factoring in just gravity. So it's taking out seams, it's taking out the spin direction of the ball, it's taking out all of that. So there's 2 points essentially there, and it's measuring the difference between those 2 points. That's how you get induced vertical break. So it might take a little bit for people to wrap their head around what that means if they aren't familiar with induced vertical break. But just to give you a general idea, major league average for fastballs is around 15, 16 inches of induced vertical break. And average horizontal movement is right around 7 or 8 inches of horizontal break. So now let's look at Tyler Glasnow. So his fastball, we can see if we follow this vertical break line. So vertical break, we go up here, he's right around 15, 16 inches. And if we look at this horizontal line, he virtually has no horizontal. He's at, maybe 1 inch of arm side movement. And all of these dots are representing individual pitches, while the dark dots, so this dark blue dot, dark green dot, and dark red dot, those are representing the average movement for that specific pitch type. So his average fastball is this dark blue one right here, and all the other blue dots, the smaller ones, those are just individual pitches. Does that make sense? Before I move on, I just want to make sure that sounds clear to you. I know you know what this is, but does that sound clear enough,
Yeah,
Patrick?
that's as basic as you can make it.
Okay, perfect. So fastball, remember, average is about 15, 16 vertical break. So he's right around average for that. Horizontal, though, average is about 7 or 8, which if you're looking here on YouTube, that would be right around here. So he has relative cut compared to average. His pitch is hugging that vertical line perfectly straight. His slider, this green one, basically has more depth. It has a lot more depth than it does horizontal off of the fastball. And that's another way to look at north-south guys is generally their off-speed pitches are going to have more vertical separation from their fastball compared to horizontal separation. So here we can see the difference in vertical break from his fastball to his slider is roughly 10, 11 inches, while the horizontal difference is probably only 4 inches. So there's a more vertical separation gap compared to horizontal. Then we look at his curveball. Once again, off the fastball, that is basically straight down. So his pitches are working north-south, meaning that he probably is going to have most of his success just going over the plate and working up with the fastball and down with the off-speed pitches. Carlos Rodon, this is a lefty version, and this is more of a typical north-south profile that you'll see. Like Glasnow is about as perfectly north-south as you'll generally see. Most guys aren't that perfect or that true north to south. Most of them are somewhere around Rodon here. So he's got his fastball pretty high VB, around 17, 18 inches with about 8 or 9 inches of horizontal break. Cutter, a little bit of depth, a little bit of horizontal movement. So that one's like probably the most like horizontal separation. Well, actually, it's not the most horizontal. There's more horizontal than vertical separation, I should say. Slider gets pretty depthy, a little slurvy. Curveball, pretty depthy, a little bit of horizontal off the fastball. And then his changeup is straight down. But you can see the general theme of this, it's definitely working more up and down than it is side to side with his pitches. So now moving on to east-west guys. You can already see that there is a huge difference between what these plots look like. So Logan Webb is here on the left, a right-handed pitcher. You can see he's got his sinker way down here around 1 inch of vertical break and about 14 inches of horizontal. And he sweeps the slider straight across with basically no vertical difference, right around 0 inches of vertical break and about 15 inches of horizontal going the other direction. Throws a four-seam fastball every once in a while, and then he's got a depthy changeup with relative cut off of the sinker because it has less horizontal break than his sinker does. Sean Manaea here on the left, a lefty version. Similar thing, very much left to right pitches. His sinker doesn't have nearly as much depth as Logan Webb's does, but the theme of his pitches are still working in this left to right action. And before I move forward, I just wanted to say, as far as like platoon splits or how effective these guys are against lefties versus righties, typically north-south guys are going to be fairly effective or fairly effectively balanced against lefties and righties because their pitchers are moving up and down. They're not really going to have heavy platoon splits. They're going to be just as effective against lefties and righties in most cases. East-west guys, on the other hand, their platoon splits are going to be a little bit different. Against same-sided hitters, so Logan Webb being a righty, when he faces right-handed batters, he typically, or pitchers like him typically, are going to have more success against right-handed batters and struggle a little bit more against lefties. And the reason for that is because their pitches, for the most part, are breaking towards the left-handed batter from a breaking ball standpoint with a big separation to where they can see that pitch a lot longer. And sinkers to opposite-handed hitters typically just don't perform well. It's actually the worst performing pitch in baseball is a sinker thrown to the opposite-handed batter. So a righty sinker against a lefty batter or a lefty sinker against a righty batter, that is the worst performing pitch. So that's why those guys typically struggle with opposite-handed guys unless they have something unique like a cut fastball they can use to those opposite-handed guys or a four seam. And Logan Webb, to be honest, so this is now going to the exceptions to the rules. He's actually more effective against lefties than he is righties. And the reason for that is because he does something unique with his sinker. He actually throws it inside to lefties consistently. So instead of going down and away to lefties like most guys do, he pounds them inside all the time. Like that's all he lives is like front hip sinkers, and then he throws his changeup off of that running down and away. All right, and then the last profile is hybrid guys. So like I said before, these guys usually have a lot of pitches and they'll change their approach depending on who they are facing. So we have Zach Wheeler here on the right. A lot of pitches. He's got four seamer, sinker, splitter, cutter, sweeper, curveball. Against left-handed batters, he primarily uses his fastball, his splitter, his cutter, and his curveball. So if you were to see like a circle going around those pitches, it's not true north to south, right? Because he's not a true north to south guy, but those pitches are moving much more north to south than when he faces right-handed batters and uses primarily his sinker and his sweeper, where those pitches are very much going right to left. So combo guys, you want to keep that in mind. They're never going to be true north-south guys when they're throwing against opposite-handed batters. But if they can, bridge that gap a little bit to where it's not as much east to west as it is against same-sided guys, they're still going to increase their effectiveness. And then Patrick Sandoval, a lefty here, he does the same thing against righties. So he's left-handed pitcher against righties. He uses his four seam primarily, his changeup, and then his curveball. Against lefties, he goes sinker, cutter, and sweeper. So, and his sinker, to be honest with you, doesn't have a lot of movement, especially off of the fastball. So even against lefties, he doesn't have a very much of an east-west approach, but it is more east-west compared to the four-seamer and the curveball usage. A lot of information right there. What questions do you have, Patrick, or did that make sense?
Yeah, I think you did a good job explaining all that. When it comes to like helping pitch, like if you don't have access to a movement plot, how do you know if you're a north-south guy, east-west guy, or a hybrid guy?
That's a great question. And the short answer is you can't get specific data, obviously, so you can't know exactly how your pitches are moving. But that's where I actually have guys that don't have access to data is to learn how to create dot balls. So what this does is it's going to show you how your ball is spinning when you throw it because it gives you a visual. If you're throwing it correctly, you'll be able to see a black dot oriented in the correct spot when you were throwing this. So just for an example, if I'm throwing a four seam fastball, I would want to have a dot on the across the tracks here on both sides of the baseball. So when I throw this, I'll be able to see what my axis is. So if I'm throwing, let's just say 12 o'clock. So 12 o'clock tilt would be perfect backspin this way. If I throw this with high efficiency and am throwing at 12 o'clock, these dots are going to be on the side of the baseball. Very much like a clean fuego. So those of you that are familiar with clean fuegos, when you're throwing those, you're trying to hide the sides. That's their slogan for it, is hiding the red part on the outside and inside part of the ball. This is just a baseball version of that. So when I throw this, I'll be able to see, okay, what is my tilt? So what direction is this ball rotating? Is it rotating sideways like this, or does it have backspin? If I have more backspin and it looks like it has true spin, I'm probably a guy that has pretty good vertical break on my four seam fastball, and it's going to be a pitch that can live up in the zone. If I throw a four seam fastball and it has a lot of run, I might be a guy that might want to throw a two seam fastball because I potentially am going to be able to sink the ball pretty well. And I can dive into that if we really want to get into the details of every single pitch type. But essentially, using these dot balls can help indicate how your pitches are moving in the general direction that they're moving. So curveball, let's just say you can use the exact same ball for a curveball as you do with the fastball. If If I'm getting top spin on this pitch and I'm hiding those sides and it's rotating like this, I'm going to know that this pitch is going to have pretty good depth, as opposed to if it starts turning towards me. So coming back to that gyro slider that we talked about earlier, where it's spinning more bullety, this pitch isn't going to have as much depth, and it's going to be more around like 2 vertical break and 2 horizontal, for example, depending on how much that dot is facing you. So those are just like some general ways to figure out what direction your ball is moving. Just the dots allow you to see the spin a little bit better. And if you really want to get into it, you can set up like just your phone on a tripod right behind release during your bullpen, have it play in slow motion so you can see exactly how it's spinning out of your hand.
So when you're working with a pitcher, is this the blueprint of what you're trying to help them focus on, or like I know guys are obviously all off season long, especially for pitchers, like they're working on their different pitches, designing pitches, things like that. Is this what they're going off of? And if so, like what is better? Like what exactly are they working on specifically? Because it seems like to me that you're kind of you already have overall like understanding of who you are as a pitcher. Like I think maybe part of it's based on release point, things like that in terms of your actual pitch profile. But it seems like you are who you are. So what exactly are guys specifically working on when they're doing pitch design sessions and they're working on their pitches in the off season?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is I do think that people can change their movement. So it says what it says. Like to
Okay.
me, that doesn't mean that's who they are. We can improve it. We can change pitch shapes. What it does do though is it informs us what type of profile they might be closer to or leaning towards. So let's just say a guy has a really good four seam fastball, a lot of carry, like a north-south guy would have, but his curveball is just not very good. His changeup maybe doesn't move a ton, but he's showing characteristics of a guy that would have a north-south approach, and maybe he just needs to fine-tune that curveball or that changeup. So that would be the first thing. So like if I have a guy come in, the first time he ever throws a bullpen with me, I'm assessing like, yeah, what is the general direction his pitches are moving? Some guys are polished. Some guys, they come in and it's very clear they're an east-west guy or they're a north-south guy or they're a combo guy. But a lot of guys, especially amateur players, they're somewhere in the middle, and we have to figure out which one do we need to push them towards. And I will preface this too, like this is very much an advanced thing. Like I do this with younger players too, but this is definitely a more advanced step. So coming back to building the foundation with stuff of, making sure you master your fastball before worrying about off-speed pitches and all of those things. This kind of goes with that too. Like if you can't throw a strike to save your life, or your velocity is crazy low and you're in high school and you're trying to play college baseball, like you can have, the best movement plot in the world, but if you can't throw a strike where you're throwing 72 miles an hour at 17, it doesn't really matter. So that's an important thing is understanding where you are in your career and what does need to be the main focus. With that said, I have used this, or I do use this with younger guys. Like I have a couple 13, 14-year-olds where I will have the TrackMan on while they're throwing their bullpens. I'm not necessarily sharing data with them, but I'm collecting it to see what is their natural tendency right now at this age. And what I will share is fastball. So I'll focus on the fastball for a lot of these guys. I posted on Twitter probably 2 or 3 months ago, a kid I was working with, and he was cutting the fastball pretty bad, and his grip was pretty wonky. And when he would show me his grip initially before he would throw it, I was like, well, the grip, it looks fine. It looks like that's the right grip. Then he'd throw it, and I'd see on my camera, my Edgertronic camera, that his grip was literally changing as he was in his glove, and the ball was coming out super weird. So because I had that information, I was able to make adjustments with it and improve the spin on that fastball to get better spin efficiency and just more clean spin on it. So I think like that's an example to where you can use it with younger players, but I'm definitely not getting into the weeds of like, hey, your curveball was -8 VB and 5 HB on that one. Let's see if we can get this one in -12. It's more so just using that for me to, collect information on how they're moving, how their pitches are being designed, and then maybe fine tune a specific pitch like a fastball, but not relating it to the movement, just relating it to them on, hey, your ball right now is spinning like this. I'd like to see you get behind this one a little bit more and see if you can just backspin this ball the best you can right through the target. So using the verbiage that resonates with them and not overcomplicating them or getting them obsessed at 13 years old with, hey, what was my movement on that pitch? What was my movement on that pitch? Because that's the last thing you want, especially at that age. And I even struggle with that even with older guys where, I realize, okay, maybe I've taken them too far down a rabbit hole with their movement to where they're not even aware of the execution of the pitch, and all they care about is how this pitch moved. So it's understanding where you are in your career and what needs to be the most important thing.
Yeah, I think for that last part, you can repeat that exact same thing to the hitting side as well, right? Where younger players, they don't need to be obsessed or worried about mechanics, and heck, you could even make that argument for a lot of the older players too. One of the things that I'll see is on PBR, Prep Baseball Report, and some of these other sites and who follow a lot of high school players and recruiting and things like that. They'll talk about spin rate. This player's got a really good spin rate for this pitch or for this fastball, this breaking ball. What are your thoughts on spin rate?
So spin rate matters because it obviously impacts the movement of the pitch, but it's one of those things that number one, you can't influence that much. Like I can maybe like fine tune a grip and we can increase the RPMs by 100 RPMs maybe. I mean, some cases it can be more drastic, but I find more success improving other areas that go into pitch movement, like their spin efficiency, like their spin direction, the way the ball is spinning, velocity, of course. Those things are going to impact the movement much more. So if I can change the efficiency or I can change the direction the ball is moving or the way the seams are oriented when they're spinning by putting them in a different position, that's going to impact the movement much more than if I get this guy to increase his RPMs by, let's just say 200 RPMs. So it's, yes, it matters, but it's not, in my opinion, it's something that you focus on with your teaching, nor do you say, hey, this guy, he spins his curveball at 2,600 RPMs. It must be a good curveball. That doesn't make a good curveball if all the other metrics aren't good. If the spin efficiency isn't where it should be, if the spin direction isn't where it needs to be, it doesn't matter. Spin direction, or sorry, spin efficient, so many spin things. Spin rate is not telling you how the pitch is moving. It's just telling you how fast it's spinning. And that's not telling you the whole story of exactly how the ball is moving. It's telling you the potential of how it could move.
Gotcha. So when you see that online, know that you don't really know the whole story, or that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great pitch per se. It just has the potential to be a great pitch.
Yeah, like let's just say we take two pitches, two curveballs. All of their metrics are exactly the same. Same velo. They have the same spin efficiency, same tilts. All of that's the same. But the spin rate is different by a couple hundred RPMs. The one with higher RPMs, yes, is going to have more movement. That curveball is going to move more, assuming every single other detail is exactly the same.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. If you're a hitting coach, because and this is something I always like to ask pitching coaches at times, and as I always am intrigued by their answers. If you're a hitting coach, what advice would you give to hitters knowing what you know from the pitching side?
Practice hitting off speed pitches because off speed pitch usage is increasing every single year at every level. So if all you're ever practicing is hitting fastballs, you're probably going to struggle with secondary pitches. So like that would be my main thing is like, yeah, like you're going to see, especially in the big leagues, you see it every year. Pitch fastball usage is going down every year, despite fastball velocity going up every year. People are throwing more and more off speed pitches. The next thing I would say is, and this only is if players are actually optimizing their arsenal to where, they're using a north-south approach to opposite hitters, east-west to same-sided hitters. I would practice that or know that, have just like the intellect of knowing like, okay, how is this guy going to use his stuff against me? And if you're at a higher level, Division I baseball, professional baseball, of course, you're going to have data. You're going to know exactly how this guy's using his stuff and you can game plan around that. So it does make it a little bit harder in high school. So that's probably not a great example of how to help hitters. But I would just say like the off speed is probably the main thing. Like get used to hitting off speed or at least recognizing it, like recognizing spin, seeing it, whether it's, with a live pitcher or with a pitching machine. So you can replicate that spin a little bit. But that'd probably be one of the things that stands out. I'm sure I'm missing a couple other big points, but what are some big things that you look for that you teach with pitchers or things for them to look for?
Well, I think it's so level dependent, and it's so level dependent because are we talking about a professional player or a high school kid, things like that? Because at the high school level, and this would be actually something maybe you could touch on a little bit. If we talk about game planning and all this stuff, for me, most of the high school pitchers that I see, they're just trying to throw strikes. I mean, when it comes to inside part of the zone, outside part of the zone, up, down, all this stuff. So I think it's very easy to overcomplicate things at the high school level, where I think simple is going to be better. Now, I think the higher up you get, and I know you work with a lot of pro pitchers, I think you can get in the weeds a little bit more, and they're trying to, this part of the zone or that part of the zone, this quadrant, all these things. But at the high school level, it's just keeping it very, very simple, looking for a fastball over the middle of the plate, and then being able to react in and out based upon that. So that way your perception of the zone is in a good place. You start slowly looking at inside part or away, your perception of the zone changes, and now you start swinging at stuff that you normally wouldn't swing at. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see, but it's solely based upon the level. And even kids younger than that, you got to even be simpler than that, where it's just, hey, we just want to be aggressive. If it's close, swing hard. So it's so level dependent. And I think that's the cool thing about being in the private sector is you see all the levels. And so you go from being very simple to being more locked in to getting very specific, at higher levels for certain players. But it all comes down to the player's personality more than anything else, and knowing what they can handle. And that's something that you said earlier. It was like, hey, even some pro guys, can get even a little bit too mechanical and focusing on that. And you got to make sure you simplify it for them too. So I think from the hitting side, that's what I see. But I agree with you when it comes to the off speed. I mean, I'm in Ohio right now, and in the playoffs last week, one of the teams faced a kid who threw over 50% sliders for the entire game. He pitched the entire game. Over 50% were all sliders. So what you're talking about, the data at the major league level, that's already starting to trickle down to the college and high school level, and the off-speed usage are going substantially up. So to your point and advice of wanting to hit more off-speed pitches, it's you need to start doing that at a very young age, because you're going to see it at a very young age too in high school pitchers.
One other thing I thought about too, just from a fastball standpoint, because I know especially at the younger ages, like you want them to hunt fastballs because they're going to get a fastball. You want to be ready for it. You don't want to get beat by a fastball. One thing that you can note, I assume this is in high school too, it's definitely in college. Guys try to live away with their fastballs. Like if you look at heat maps for college baseball, fastballs primarily are thrown middle away. They're trying to just catch that outside corner. So like when I was a hitter, and this was a while ago when I was in high school, it was the same thing. I remember high school kids, they would just live away, away, away. If a high school kid could command a fastball inside, he was really good. So as a hitter, like I always tried to like stand on the plate a little bit more because I hated away pitches. I couldn't hit away fastballs very well.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
tried to cheat it a little bit by getting on the plate and challenge him to throw me inside if he thinks he can command it inside with me on top of the plate. So I'm not a hitting coach, but that's something to note is that most amateur players are trying to live away with their fastball.
Good stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff for coaches to know. I would say maybe like a few weeks ago, you had sent me something that I thought was really cool, and that was a couple of your slides from a course that you've been working on called Pitch Design U, which I thought was phenomenal because again, it's simple but also in depth too. And so it takes you through like exactly how you go about designing pitches for coaches, right? For coaches helping with players and also for players too. I think it's simple enough for players can be able to go in there and learn and be able to understand themselves. And so it's a course you've been working on, Pitch Design U. Walk us through it, because I think it's something that I think would be very beneficial for coaches, hitting and pitching coaches, quite frankly, out there.
Yeah, so there's going to be three modules in this course, and the first one is going to be going over the fundamentals of pitch movement. What creates pitch movement? What are some of the key terms? Like some of these things I've mentioned, maybe have gone over some people's heads, and I apologize if they have. Like terms like spin efficiency, spin direction, spin rate will be in there briefly. All those types of metrics. I'm going to define what those actually mean, what to look for, what's important, what's not important, really building a foundation for what the heck does pitch movement mean? And this doesn't have to apply to just people that have a TrackMan or have a Rapsodo. I'm going to be showing a lot of visuals of how the ball should be spinning so that you can use some of these tools like I'm showing here with dot balls to where you can still get valuable work in. And maybe you can't, tell the exact number and be able to say, hey, this one swept at 15 inches, but you'll have a general idea that, yeah, that ball was oriented correctly. It looked like it moved. It passed the eye test. Like that looks like it's moving in the general direction that we want it to. So it can be very valuable still for people if you don't have a TrackMan or a Rapsodo. Then in module 2, I'm going to dive into pitch grips and how to throw every single pitch type. I'll be showing major league examples to where you can see their movement plot of how their fastballs move. I'll be showing like different variations of every pitch type. So I'll show fastballs that have more true carry, some that cut a little bit, sinkers, pitches that have really good depth on them. I'll show you what those look like, as well as edgertronic footage of how those pitches are rotating out of the hand. So you can see exactly how they're moving. And then I'll walk through how to hold all of those pitches with multiple grip options and walk you through where to put these dots on the baseball and how they should be spinning and oriented when you're throwing it. So that one's going to be like probably the best module, or the one that people are going to be interested in the most, is because it's going to be actionable and you're going to be able to apply it immediately. And the third module, this one will be really helpful for coaches and players, but I'm going to walk through some analytics of pitches. I'm going to talk about what types of pitches you should throw to lefties versus righties, or which ones perform the best. And I'll also be showing the locations of those pitches of where in the zone are these effective and where they may be less effective versus inside, outside, over the middle, things of that nature. And then I will finish up by going through some examples of major leaguers of how they use their stuff. I'll show you their movement plot as well as showing their pitch usage so you can see how they attack lefties versus righties differently. Then I'll also show you the locations of their pitches so you can see how that lines up with some of the data of where optimal locations are. And you might see some things where it's like, hey, yeah, Zach Wheeler, yeah, his fastball is pretty good, but maybe he could command this one a little bit better and he could be up and in a little bit more, something like that. You'll be able to get an idea of where their pitches are located versus how they perform. And then I have a little bonus segment at the end where I'll walk through some case studies of building an arsenal step by step to where, you'll have an example of a guy's performance stats of, okay, how's he doing against lefties versus righties? I'll show his movement plot. And then based off of that information, how would you go about formulating a plan? What would be the best pitch for this guy to add or subtract to his arsenal? So it's really actionable and gives you some examples of maybe some players that you have on your team or yourself if you are a player.
What's the biggest benefit? Like if I'm a coach out there, like what's going to be the biggest benefit that I'm going to get from buying this course?
I would say the biggest thing is you're going to be able to develop pitches much faster. Like you're going to be able to know exactly what your guy needs as well as how to actually do it. It's one thing to know like, hey, yeah, this guy doesn't have a very good breaking ball. He needs a good breaking ball. But this course is going to allow you to know the type of breaking ball that would benefit him and would be beneficial, and then also how to actually throw it and have the tools to implement it immediately. So I would just say it's more of that. There's a lot of information, but more than anything, my goal with this course is to make it actionable so you know exactly what to do and how to do it.
Beautiful. If someone's interested, where do they go? Where can they get this course at?
So it'll be available. I mean, I think you said this will be released basically the day it's being released. It's being released on June 10th, Monday, June 10th, and it will be on my website, pitchingcoachu.com. I don't know exactly what the slug will be or what it'll be. It'll probably be pitchingcoachu.com/PDU. But I'll make sure that I let you know what that is and you can attach it in the show notes. And it'll also I'll post it on my Twitter account as well on Monday when it releases.
Okay, pitchingcoachu.com. Check it out. Jared, thanks again for coming on the show, man.
As always, Patrick, I had a blast.